is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. China sets its growth target for 2021, more than 6% at the world's biggest political gathering in Beijing.
Our other headlines, the CEO of Volkswagen China tells CGTN he expects the East to lead the world in the road to recovery.
The EU backs Italy's move to block shipping AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine to Australia.
Supermarket sweep. Amazon's new high street shop means you'll no longer have to queue at the till to pay.
And who needs a cook? The restaurant robots giving chefs their just desserts.
China is setting out its economic vision for the year ahead, and the international community is watching the world's second largest economy with interest. More than 6%, that's the GDP growth China seeks to achieve for 2021. The Chinese Premier Li Keqiang unveiled the target to the country's top legislature as its annual session got underway. China will create at least 11 million new urban jobs this year and keep the unemployment rate at around about 5.5%. Greater efforts will be made to achieve breakthroughs in key technologies. China will increase related spending by more than 7% per year in the next 5 years. So what are the implications of all these targets, and do they really matter to Europe? Our correspondent Nuid Jabakal reports.
The two sessions is taking place thousands of miles away, but businesses and governments in Europe are keeping a keen eye on it. China recently overtook the US as the EU's #1 trading partner, a relationship now worth more than $700 billion. The
main targets for development this year are as follows. GDP growth of over 6%, over 11 million new urban jobs, a surveyed urban unemployment rate of around 5.5%, CPI increase of around 3%.
Last year, amid the global pandemic, China dropped its official growth targets. Their return will be welcome news for European businesses in particular, after the two sides struck an investment deal in December.
Apparently, customers and people like each other's products, but of course there's far more potential. I mean, still the European Union companies export to the US twice as much as they do to China.
COVID-19 will also feature heavily in the two sessions, and with China's early success in managing its outbreak, some analysts think the pandemic could lead to more competition with other global powers.
It's like a game theory. It depends on how others react to that. Others may fear more than before, going back to my point, and may actually feel less inclined to accept that reality or that coming reality. So this is why I think it's very important for China to keep calm and not to break that wave of historical achievement.
One area that Europe and China will be hoping to work closer on in the coming years is climate change. Any concrete plans for how China aims to reduce its CO2 emissions will be welcome news for a warming world. Once seen as a largely domestic affair, with China's rise on the global stage, what happens at this event is reverberating worldwide. That's particularly the case for the EU, which, unlike some of its Western allies, has recently opted for closer dialogue with China. It's a relationship that isn't always smooth, but one that's becoming increasingly important for both sides. Nuid Jabakal, CGTN, London.
Well, let's talk to Ginny Yan, the chief China economist at ICBC Standard Bank. Ginny, sitting in Europe, what's your takeaway from all of this?
Well, it's a very crucial balance between stability and ambition. I think it's a very ambitious plan for the next 5 years and beyond. But really, 2021 is a transition year. It's a year all about how to keep China growing. Now, the floor has been set at 6%, but clearly many are hoping this will be more, much greater, maybe 8%. So what that means for Europe and the rest of the world is that the rest of the world can depend on China for that recovery.
And what about the global response? I mean, I guess there'll be a palpable sigh of relief internationally. China's the biggest trading partner for many major economies, including, of course, the EU.
Indeed, and especially with the China-EU trade deal is still under discussions, but also a key component of China's trade relationship globally that is crucial. But more importantly, China is becoming a consumption-led economy. So China is becoming a large market for many European and international firms. Auto sector was one example, but also others, and in particular in strategic sectors such as technology, but also when it comes to climate change, renewable energy. So that will be crucial for global supply chains.
There is a note of caution in all of this, isn't there, with China's finance ministry expressing some concern about the state of the government budget. They say the outlook for government revenue and expenditure appears quite grave. Are you cautious?
Well, I think we have been cautious about China's quality of growth for quite some time, really since the financial crisis. As we know, China has been building up leverage or debt. How sustainable is that level of debt? Well, it depends on how much you can grow the base, so how much further you can grow GDP. But what the regulator has warned us against is inflating asset bubbles, housing market equities, and also in the wake of recovery in the rest of the world, we're also going to see some feed-through effects of US inflation and global inflation. So that will have an impact on spending. And that is key, I think, for 2021, how much consumption can be unleashed from the domestic economy.
And for those of us who are not outstanding economists, just help us with your suggestion about the quality or quantity of growth. What do you mean?
Well, we've actually not had explicit targets last year, as your news story suggested. So some implicit targets mean that even though the GDP growth itself is growing at between 6 to 8% this year, and on average, it needs to grow by 4.5% every year for the next 15 years. Quality of growth, however, takes on measures such as, well, how much does that impact social indicators? So income growth, for example, for example, pollution, emissions, all of those mean that the efficiency of that GDP growth needs to improve.
Ginny Ann, lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme.
Chinese lawmakers are now considering measures to reform the electoral system in Hong Kong. NPC Vice Chairman Wang Chen says the change is to make sure that Hong Kong is governed by patriots. Wang says the reform would prevent anti-China, destabilising elements from seizing power. So what does that mean for Hong Kong? Will opposition be, in effect, banned? CGTN's Zhu Dan asked the city's former leader, Leung Chun-ying.
Now, what are patriots? Let's see who are not the patriots. In the past couple of years in Hong Kong, we have seen people who dashed off, not once, but several times, regularly, to, for example, Washington, D.C., asking the United States government to sanction Hong Kong and the whole of China. Now, whatever the definition of patriot is, I think we can define the non-patriots, people who have this unpatriotic behavior, pretty clearly. In many other countries in the world, these actions could be described as treasonous. These are acts of treason. So these are not patriots, and they should not form part of the governing body of Hong Kong.
The European Union has warned of additional steps in response to Beijing's plans to vet Hong Kong lawmakers. The EU said installing a committee to screen election candidates would break commitments to protect the city's autonomy. Brussels has already limited exports of surveillance equipment to Hong Kong since new security legislation was introduced last year.
Well, Belarus has issued a statement on behalf of 70 countries expressing support for China's policies in Hong Kong. It was read by the Belarus representative to the UN Human Rights Council. A list of the countries behind the statement has not yet been published.
Non-interference in internal affairs of sovereign states is an important principle enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and a basic norm governing international relations. Since the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security, the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region came into force, Hong Kong has got rid of turbulence and gradually restored stability. We urge the relevant sides to respect China's sovereignty and stop interfering in Hong Kong affairs as well as China's internal affairs.
Well, China's UN ambassador has also just been speaking at the Human Rights Council meeting about those plans for electoral reform in Hong Kong.
The electoral system in Hong Kong SAR is an important component part of its political system. Hong Kong's situation in recent years has shown that its electoral system needs to keep pace with the times and undergo improvements to provide sound institutional safeguards. China will firmly continue to adhere to the principles of one country, two systems, the people of Hong Kong governing Hong Kong, and a high degree of autonomy.
And we will return to the two sessions later on in the show when we'll hear from the Chinese ambassador to France on the possibility of a free trade deal.
Shares in the London Stock Exchange have fallen around 5%, wiping billions from its market value. That's despite a 5% increase in full-year operating profits to $1.5 billion. The bourse showed more confidence in its outlook than investors, raising its final dividend by 7%, buoyed by its recent $27 billion acquisition of the data and analytics company Refinitiv. Tesla is set to become a partner in a nickel mine on the French Pacific island of New Caledonia. Use of the metal in electric car batteries has grown in recent years, as have fears over its supply. The partnership will now give Tesla greater control over its raw material supply chain as it increases production. Spain's King Felipe and Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez have visited a SEAT factory in Barcelona to show their support for the car industry. Originally planned for December last year, but delayed by COVID, the King was shown the new electric vehicle facility. At present, this factory doubles up as a vaccination centre. Nursing unions in the UK are preparing for strike action after British nurses were offered a 1% pay rise. That's less than the current inflation rate. The Royal College of Nursing says it'll set up a fund to support a mass walkout unless salaries are increased. The union had been campaigning for a 12.5% pay rise.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Spain hopes to lead the way in vaccine passports to save the country's struggling tourism industry.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter we bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Australia has asked the European Commission to review Italy's decision to block a shipment of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine. Japan is investigating the row as countries importing EU-made shots fear an impact on their supplies. Italy's decision follows the pharmaceutical firm's failure to meet its EU contract commitments. Let's talk to our correspondent Tony Waterman following the story for us in Brussels. Tony, what reaction, if any, from the Commission and other European capitals to Rome's blocking of this vaccine shipment?
Well, Jamie, Brussels and a number of member states spent at least part of the day today trying to justify this move by Italy. The line in Europe has been and is still that this is not about hoarding vaccines for Europe. It's not about vaccine nationalism, when it comes to these export controls. It's about keeping the vaccine makers honest and making sure that they deliver on their contractual obligations. AstraZeneca has come up about 70 million doses short in the first quarter of the year, and it's still unclear at this point whether or not it's going to be able to meet its delivery target of 180 million doses in the second quarter of this year. Pfizer and Moderna, the other two approved vaccines for use here, also have had supply issues with the sheer volume of doses coming out and ramping up capacity. Now, one thing perhaps working in Italy's favor on this particular rejection on shipping these jabs over to Australia is that Australia right now is in a much better position than a lot of other places in the world.
If you need proof of how under control the COVID-19 pandemic is down under, look no further than Australia's strikingly calm response to news that Italy has blocked a shipment of AstraZeneca jabs to the country. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, saying he understands Rome's rationale, and he doesn't believe the bloc is engaging in vaccine nationalism.
They are in an unbridled crisis situation. That is not the situation in Australia.
That being said, Canberra urged Brussels to review the decision, but stressed that the missed shipment of 250,000 doses won't derail Australia's vaccine rollout, which kicked off only 2 weeks ago. Italy is the first country to make good on EU threats to halt the shipment of jabs since export controls were introduced in January. The regulation requires companies to seek permission before exporting abroad and was put in place over fears that doses meant for Europe were being sent elsewhere. The controls are due to expire this month, but amid a continued vaccine shortage, the rules will reportedly be extended until the end of June.
Of course, we have to take a strong interest in this and, if necessary, exert pressure so that pledged deliveries are honoured and reliably so.
While Italy was the first to act, it could be the opening other member states were waiting for. On French TV Friday morning, France's health minister didn't rule out a similar move.
We could do the same.
Have you done that?
We'll see.
Brussels, keen to show it's not hoarding jabs, says it has approved 174 export applications since January to more than 30 countries.
Let's not try to shift the situation here. The fact is that the European Union is a major exporter.
But for every block shipment, Brussels will have to explain why European citizens deserve the jab more than others.
Tony, any sign that Europe's vaccine procurement programs and rollouts are speeding up and improving?
Well, Jamie, little by little, day by day, I mean, more people are getting immunized across the bloc. But if I can give you just one little example, if Belgium were to keep vaccinating people at the current pace, it would take them an additional 146 days to immunize another 10% of the population. So you can see the urgency here in speeding up the way that this process is rolling out right now. And this is a similar situation that's taking place across the bloc. Now, one thing that is going to help is the fact that a number of countries which had been limiting the AstraZeneca vaccine in people over 65, they've reversed those decisions. Germany, Sweden, Belgium, France, and then today, Denmark following suit, also saying that the jab is safe in older age groups. What Brussels is really banking on at this point is a flood of vaccines which are expected in the second quarter of this year. 300 million doses are meant to be delivered. Now, if there are no production delays or glitches or delivery delays, that could really go a long way in helping to accelerate the pace of vaccination across the bloc. The other thing that could potentially help is that the European Commission is putting tens of millions of dollars into trying to figure out ways to ramp up production. If there is any sort of idle capacity in Europe at all, they are going to these production plants and trying to figure out ways to bring them online to start producing some of these jabs. So if all of these stars can sort of align in the coming weeks, then perhaps in the second quarter of this year, Europe can really see an improvement to its vaccine rollout.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
Dr. Giovanni Rezza is Director General in Prevention at the Italian Ministry of Health. I asked him whether this move by Rome has triggered a scramble for vaccines by European countries.
I hope there won't be any fight for vaccines between countries in the future. The problem was that, Italy received 13.46% of all doses of vaccines going to the European Union, because this was an agreement made on the basis of the population size of each country. But unfortunately, they were delayed in the provision of vaccines by several companies, and for these reasons there was a shortage of vaccines. But we expect a big increase in the provision of vaccines in the second trimester of this year. So I think that at that point, that means within 1 month, there won't be shortage anymore, and everything could be dealt with in a better way.
We're just hearing in the last few moments that British media is reporting that the mystery person in the UK who tested positive for a Brazilian coronavirus variant of concern has been found. Last week it was announced that all but one of the 6 patients with the variant had been traced. Scientists believe this variant, first identified in the Brazilian city of Manaus, appears to be more contagious, with concerns that vaccines may not be as effective. In total, 3 of the British cases are in England, with the other 3 in Scotland. Spain says it wants to be a pioneer in the use of vaccination passports to boost its tourism industry. This comes as the EU neighbours announce their plans to attract vaccinated tourists to their countries. Rahul Pathak reports.
Passengers arriving at Madrid's Barajas airport this Friday. They could soon be in possession of an additional passport that could help facilitate their travel. The digital green pass or vaccination passport is a scheme that the EU is developing. Spain hopes to be one of the first countries to have its version ready to roll out.
We have created an internal commission to assess when to begin a pilot test, so that it's ready to use as soon as pandemic numbers allow it. It's key for this government to have every possible kind of technology tool available. We want to get people moving again and make both Spain and Europe safe destinations to travel once more.
There are still questions on exactly when this rollout would happen, what form it would take, and who would qualify. Spain does face stiff competition for vaccinated tourists across Europe. This week, Cyprus stated that it will allow UK travellers to enter from May if they have received 2 doses. Now for Spain, any vaccine passport scheme cannot come soon enough. Here at Barajas Airport, it's virtually empty. Now, over 12% of Spain's GDP comes from tourism, and with high season fast approaching, the Spanish government wants to act now and act quickly. Other countries, such as France and Germany, have expressed reservations over the use of this system as a right to travel. The European Commission does plan to present its proposal later this month to provide a desperately needed boost to tourism.
I'm very positive about it. We are in a very stressed condition right now, and the more transparency and the more sharing information among our citizens and society, the better for everyone to know, yes.
Yes, because, for example, me, I have to do 2 tests, and I had to sleep here because today morning I had to have a test in order to fly to Amsterdam.
There are still a number of technical, political and ethical issues to overcome with vaccination passports, but the Spanish government hopes to be one of the first countries to pioneer its use. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Austria has one of the world's highest coronavirus testing rates. On average, more than 2.5 million people take a test each week at free facilities across the country. As Johannes Pleshberger reports, it's helping businesses to reopen.
If you go for a walk at Vienna's famous Schönbrunn Palace, you may as well get tested right there. Austria, one of the world champions in testing, offers the opportunity for a free coronavirus swab in all sorts of places, be it in palaces, in large event halls, at one's own employers, or in the nearest pharmacy. Currently, a quarter of Austria's population tests itself once a week. One of them is 19-year-old Katharina Kreiner. She picked up a free home test at the pharmacy, the latest innovation in Austria. Your status can be checked, and even if the result is positive, there is no obligatory registration.
Because I want to know it for myself, so that I'm not infected and that I'm not infecting other people. That's important to me, because I want to protect my nearest ones.
Key to Austria's approach is the concept of entry tests. For the past 3 weeks, hairdressers, for instance, may only be visited with a registered negative test result.
Our customers have to bring their test result. We check it as soon as they come through the door.
But not all of her customers want to be tested, says hairdresser Annemarie Kobalt. Half of the clients have stayed away since the reopening.
Many regular customers who, for example, come every week for a haircut or even twice a week, naturally say, I don't want to be tested twice a week. So they only come every 2 weeks instead, and that's why we have fewer customers now.
Despite the rising number of infections, the government has announced that some restaurants and bars with outside space will be able to open. In less than 2 weeks, tested people will be allowed to eat and drink out again, even if for now in only one of the 9 Austrian regions.
We have become the testing world champions. Our test programs are allowing us to reopen.
In order to support its approach, the government refers to research published by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology.
If you test a quarter of the population once a week, the reproduction rate drops by 40%.
With the EU vaccine program beset by delays, Austria is trying to take matters into its own hands through massive testing. It is also working independently with Israel and Denmark with the aim to produce second-generation vaccines against current and future mutations of the coronavirus. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Vienna.
Well, it's not just humans getting vaccinated against a potentially deadly infection. Penguins at Bergen Aquarium are emerging from a 3-month lockdown. They've just been vaccinated against a strain of avian flu found in Norway. The birds, which are native to the Falkland Islands and South Georgia, are flapping their way to freedom after being treated according to their age. More at europe.cgtn.com. And remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. On YouTube as well and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and on the CGTN app.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Pope Francis touches down in Iraq for an historic visit despite security concerns in the war-torn country.
patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories: the EU backs Italy's move to block shipping AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine to Australia.
Supermarket sweep. Amazon's new high street shop means you'll no longer have to queue at the till to pay.
And China sets its growth target for 2021 more than 6% at the world's biggest political gathering in Beijing.
All right, well, let's take a look at how world markets have been responding to China's growth target of more than 6%. Jamil Ahmad specialises in market development. He's Director of Investment Strategy at the German fintech group Naga. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. So China's growth targets seem to be signalling confidence. How is that going down with investors?
Thank you for having me. Definitely confidence. If you look at 2020, China was only one of the two G20 countries to actually grow and expand in the economies last year. And this year, we're looking at growth in 2021 of somewhere around 6%, which obviously is going to be good news for everybody because you've got Chinese contributing now to global GDP, and the global economy is creeping towards 20%. We have between 17 and 18% at the moment. So obviously on that aspect, when you look at the economic picture and the recovery for the globe away from the pandemic, a stronger China does increase the chances of a stronger world economy as a whole. But when you look at the global financial markets picture, the biggest influence really is still what happens in Wall Street in the United States. But for economic growth, China definitely has a stronger influence.
And do you think investors are encouraged about this effort to tackle debt in China?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Just one more time. Do you think investors are encouraged by efforts to deal with China's debt?
Yes, they will be. I think that global debt as a whole is one of these big problems that has arose during the pandemic. And that's not necessarily something that's idiosyncratic or isolated to China, but that's a global theme. Look at what happened to the United Kingdom this week with the UK budget, and you've got the US economy, which has printed, close to $3 trillion during this pandemic. All of that has to be paid back. So I think that any indications that major economies or emerging economies will do to try and tighten those buffers, that's going to be digested positively by investors.
And Jamil, China not the only place beating forecasts. What impact do you think the better-than-expected US jobs report had?
It's certainly a welcome boost. I think that this is the first full month of the employment report, considering that was for February, and that was the first full month of Joe Biden's first term in office. So it's definitely a positive indication, but we also have to take into account that it's too early to give conclusions of a correlation between the presidency change. What we do know is that the US did have minus jobs growth for quite some time coming out to 2020. The US economy overall does remain about 10 million people unemployed. At least half of that is from the pandemic and that impact. We just hope that as economies begin to reopen, as vaccines get distributed, and as more people get protected, and hopefully economies start to reopen up, that the jobs recovery on a global market scale is going to improve considerably.
Elsewhere in the markets, the price of oil is at its highest since COVID struck. What's driving that?
So essentially, we've got a perfect recipe now for stronger oil prices from vaccine optimism. Markets still remain close to record highs. Optimism as well that economy is going to reopen. And hopefully that slowly but surely the tide is turning and we're coming towards the ending of this pandemic, fingers crossed. This improves oil demand significantly, and that's why prices have risen. US oil price touched $65 for the first time since early January 2020. We've also got a great deal of optimism that more demand will be there in oil market as this pandemic hopefully concludes. And we've had prices that have risen by 30% this year so far. I do think that US oil can gradually go towards $70. I'm not going to say it's going to get any higher than $70 when it comes to US oil, but at the moment $65 is something that producers will be content with.
And finally, briefly, if you could, Jamil, here in Europe with vaccine rollouts going kind of patchily and lockdowns still in place, how much optimism is there of a speedy recovery later on in the year?
I think you've hit the nail on the hammer there, because essentially Europe is unfortunately going to be behind the curve because of the very slow distribution of the vaccine so far. Hopefully they can pick up speed, but we do look at the problems now and the risk that the European economic recovery could really trail behind what we see in other major economies. You mentioned US, the jobs report, the UK is getting more optimistic. And that would be a big problem because it was the same kind of issue, different circumstances with the global financial crisis of 10 years ago, where Europe, to many accounts, and it's still debated whether it really did recover from that financial crisis overall. And we're more than 10 years past that now.
OK, Jamil Ahmad, thank you so much. China says it will consolidate its poverty relief achievements in the coming years. Last year, the country said it had eliminated extreme poverty. In the government work report on Friday, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said efforts will be made to stop people falling back into deprivation. Over the past 4 decades, of every 10 people lifted out of poverty across the globe, at least 7 of them were in China. China's current poverty threshold is set at or below $620 a year. That's around $1.70 a day. In 2012, nearly 100 million Chinese people were still living in deprivation. There were more than 800 registered poor counties occupying half of the country. Last year, though, the last 9 impoverished counties in southwestern China were removed from the poverty list. Over the past 8 years, China has invested $248 billion in fighting poverty. The government says its policies will continue as it transitions to what it calls rural revitalization. These policies include ensuring food and clothing supplies to those areas, building more schools, increased medical access and safe housing.
Well, China's new 5-year plan and the longer-term 2035 goals will focus on green and high-quality development. CGTN spoke to China's ambassador to France.
China's new development plan will stress innovation as the primary driving force for economic growth. Future China-France cooperation could focus on emerging industries, including information technology, biotechnology and clean energy. In the meantime, the China-EU investment agreement has also opened the renewable energy sector as an area of cooperation. With the investment agreement expected to be signed and come into effect later, we hope we can start free trade talks with the EU. There has been a global trend of having FTAs between major trading economies. An FTA will provide some guarantee for long-term trade and economic development for China and the EU.
At the same time, we have noticed that French President Emmanuel Macron has described China as partner, competitor, and also systematic rival. What's your understanding of this?
The relationship between China and the EU has long been defined as a comprehensive strategic partner. China does not agree with France and the EU labelling China as a systematic rival. It somehow reflects their West-centric arrogance, which holds that as long as your social system is different from theirs, you are no good. The social systems in China and Europe are indeed different, but it doesn't mean that the two can't coexist peacefully. What we advocate is precisely that different social models can coexist peacefully.
The CEO of Volkswagen China has said he expects the country to continue leading the recovery in the global car market. Stefan Wallenstein called for a final sprint in business reform and opening up efforts from this year's two sessions. He was speaking to CGTN's Michael Wang.
As many other companies, I guess we can be grateful that we benefited a bit from the strong recovery in China that we saw. You probably noticed that in the automotive sector. If you take the recovery of second half 2020, which was already a strong one, we see this also projecting into 2021. And if our projection becomes true, then China would also have mastered this one, and we would see growth in the automotive market and I guess also in the general economy, which is going beyond the levels when we saw the dip starting in 2018. So pretty promising. So we are looking very positively, as also the other business community.
Dr. Wallenstein, we are gearing up for China's top political sessions for the year, the two sessions. What kind of policy signals are you looking out for?
As always, we expect, let's say, strong signals about the government supporting the economic development. We would also expect, but a lot has already happened, to further confirm on the opening up of China. We very much welcome the final sprint, I have to say, between China and the European Union in December. We have concluded a deal in Anhui with Volkswagen Anhui, as it is named now, formerly JAC Volkswagen. Audi has just announced that we do a similar setup with our partner FAW around the PPE company. Both are two electric ventures that we are doing. So this is, for me, showing very clear that there is a political willingness in order to further open up.
How do we distribute COVID vaccines more fairly? We'll be asking China's ambassador to the United Nations when our two sessions coverage continues tomorrow. Scientists say there could be more earthquakes for New Zealand. It comes after 3 quakes, all above magnitude 7, prompted evacuations. The country's geological monitoring agency says more are likely, but tsunami warnings have been lifted and residents are allowed to return home. Hungarian leader Viktor Orbán says his ruling Fidesz party is in talks with conservative groups in the European Parliament. This after it left a centre-right alliance before being kicked out amid concern over the party's democratic record. Orbán says talks were ongoing with groups from Italy and Poland, adding that he wanted to see a home in the Parliament for anti-immigration groups. Milan has tightened COVID restrictions as cases there surge. The regional governor is shutting all schools and banning home visits and public exercise. The area was already in an orange zone, meaning bars and restaurants could only offer takeaways, and people couldn't leave their towns. President Jair Bolsonaro has told Brazilians to stop whining about COVID-19. His comments came a day after Brazil saw record deaths in a 24-hour period. The country is facing its worst phase yet of the pandemic, leaving its health system in crisis. The World Health Organization says the risk of an Ebola outbreak spreading to Guinea's neighbours is very high. Guinea was the centre of the 2013 to 2016 outbreak. It killed 11,000 people across West Africa. The WHO says the region doesn't have ample vaccination plans.
Pope Francis has arrived in Iraq for the first ever papal visit despite fears over his security. About 10,000 Iraqi security forces personnel have been deployed to look after him. Our correspondent Laith Al-Haidar is in Baghdad. Laith, big concerns over security and coronavirus surrounding this visit.
Well, heavy deployment of security forces. Witness said even snipers distributed and on the buildings' rooftops. Soldiers, intelligence, all kinds of forces. Even some people said from every 10 meters you will find a soldier. Most of the forces have taken position in Baghdad to create a safe environment for the Pope's visit. Some said there is a standing soldier in every 30 or 10 meters, but the issue is that the defensive might be so exaggerated from the Iraqi government. And I think this is normally because it is a historical event. And we are expecting the Pope to go visit Ali Sistani's office tomorrow morning, and then he will go to Nasiriyah to pay a visit maybe to the Zakurat of Ur. And in there, the people of Nasiriyah, who suffered a lot from the human rights violations, and they have some kind of a point of view about this visit, because this visit could give some kind of legitimacy to the Iraqi government, who violated lots of human rights against those protesters. So maybe those people will give a message tomorrow evening to the Pope.
Laith Al-Haidar in Baghdad, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. International condemnation of the military takeover in Myanmar is growing louder as the United Nations meets to discuss sanctions. The military seized power in February, and the country's elected leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, remains in detention. Jemima Walker reports.
Grief and anger at the funeral of a protester killed in Myanmar as a week of deadly protest draws to a close.
He was my eldest son. He got shot while he was trying to save his friend, who also got shot. The police shot him right in his heart, without humanity.
Among protesters, defiance is continuing, with hundreds of people taking to the streets on Friday. Protesters are facing a stronger police crackdown. According to the UN's estimation, at least 38 protesters were killed on Wednesday. One person reportedly died on Friday after police opened fire on a gathering crowd. At least 1,700 have been detained. This mobile footage shows hundreds of people being led onto police trucks in Yangon. Away from Myanmar's streets, international condemnation is growing.
Myanmar's military must stop murdering and jailing protesters. It is utterly abhorrent that security forces are firing live ammunition against peaceful protesters across the country. We're also appalled at the documented attacks against emergency medical staff and ambulances that are attempting to provide care to those who have been injured.
Neighbouring Singapore has condemned the junta, saying the military's use of weapons against its own people is a national shame. On the diplomatic stage, there's been a tussle over who represents Myanmar in the UN. The ambassador was fired by the junta after encouraging member states to help reverse the military takeover,
to take action against the Myanmar military,
but has now been reinstated after the military's replacement quit. The UN Security Council is meeting on Friday to discuss the crisis, as the body's special rapporteur on Myanmar calls for a global arms embargo. The country's military has indicated it will not be swayed by sanctions. Jemima Walker, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a walk outside with just one other person from your household. Well, that's become familiar in lockdown, but this really is in a different world.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
NPC and CPPCC, China's biggest annual political gathering of lawmakers and political advisors. As the world's second largest economy recovers from the pandemic, it chalks out plans for the coming year and beyond. With new proposals, laws, and targets, CGTN brings you unmatched coverage of the meetings that matter. Exclusive interviews, people's voices, in-depth analysis, and the impact on the rest of the world. China's 2 sessions begins March 4th. Live and exclusive on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Amazon has opened its first till-less shop outside the United States. Campaigners have raised privacy concerns about the store, which uses hundreds of cameras and in-depth sensors. But others say this is a landmark moment for the grocery sector. Juliet Mann went shopping.
Grab what you want and walk out. Yes, really. No checkouts, no queues.
I think it's quite seamless. It's a very efficient way of doing groceries, especially during COVID.
It was strange, you know, not scanning anything, but it was good. It was fine, yes. Pity it wasn't bigger.
If this is the future of grocery shopping, it might take some getting used to.
This feels a bit strange, just putting the shopping straight into my bag. Perhaps this is what a thief feels like.
Already trialled in the US, this is the first convenience grocery store to offer Just Walk Out tech in the UK.
Most of the technology is in the ceiling, so you can have a look. There are cameras and there are sensors all around here. It's very much like what they use in driverless cars, so motion sensors. So if I take something off the shelf, it knows if I put it back and only charges me if it's actually in my bag.
It is completely cashless. All you need is the app, which charges your Amazon account and bills you later.
Supermarkets have been enjoying strong sales during the pandemic, but it's online grocery sales that have been grabbing a larger slice of market share. So this move to bricks and mortar by Amazon, the world's largest online retailer, is interesting. Is it about saving the high street and supporting local producers by cutting out delivery costs? Or is this a shop window to showcase and sell the technology wholesale?
That's arguably the Ocado business model. Created 20 years ago with the ambitious goal of revolutionising the online grocery market, Ocado now sees itself as a tech company rather than a retailer. It's done big international deals for its smart software, with retailers ranging from Marks and Spencer's in the UK to US supermarket chain Kroger.
Amazon is a technology company. Just look at the share price. The multiples in terms of their revenue and profits reflects that they are a technology company. It does not reflect that they are a retail company. So there is definitely something about a tech play here. But I think also Amazon is a very customer-centric company. And there is something also here about connecting with customers, about capturing more data about customers, and about understanding that customer journey more.
It's not quite the total surveillance shopping experience. There's no facial recognition, not yet. But it highlights how businesses can use consumer data and track what we buy. This space might be smaller than a typical supermarket, but the disruption potential is big. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
Fried chicken restaurants in South Korea are adapting amid the pandemic. Restaurants concerned about staff social distancing in the kitchen or waiters infecting customers needn't worry. Robots are coming to the rescue. But with machines taking over, what does it mean for the human workers? Joseph Kim reports.
Korean fried chicken is the new KFC. The food is so popular in South Korea, some even call the country the Chicken Republic. But for restaurants, it's grueling work, having to fry chicken in sizzling hot oil day and night. So this local startup is trying to stay ahead of the competition.
We believe restaurants like ours with automated kitchens will become the future of South Korea. And in the next decade, we truly believe a kitchen without a human chef will become the norm.
It's a robot that fries chicken. Each step, from the battering to the cooking, is fully automated, able to finish the dish in roughly 9.5 minutes. But as orders pile up, Kang says this robot becomes more efficient and productive than its human counterparts. And amid the coronavirus, the store is seeing a jump in sales.
We have many customers who are concerned for their family's health and inquire about our robot. I believe they feel safer ordering from us as an automated cook is an option to avoid the coronavirus.
COVID-19 is helping accelerate South Korea's adoption of robots. The government is already spending hundreds of millions of dollars each year to make the leap to smart factories. And according to the International Federation of Robotics, South Korea is the most automated nation in the world. This robot recently faced off against a person to see which could fry chicken faster. In less than a minute, this machine was declared the victor. The gradual use of these robots signified the transition to making this type of work dead labor. But an impending and dire question remains. Where will the humans who were once tasked with these jobs go? Automation is expected to hit the country's service and manufacturing sectors the hardest. According to a recent report, 2/3 of all manufacturing workers face a high risk of getting laid off, while 70% of the workforce works in the service sector. In response, the government has started programs to help its workforce develop skills to handle robots. But experts say more needs to be done. Joseph Kim for CGTN, Seoul.
Now let's end with a spectacular story which has, frankly, a rather dull beginning. Ready? Here we go. A man and a woman go for a walk. Nothing unusual about that, unless you're 250 miles up and braving the cold of the cosmos in a spacewalk. This is Kate Rubins and Soichi Noguchi doing a bit of DIY on the International Space Station. It's the 236th spacewalk ever undertaken. It is riddled with danger and technically out of this world. A great human endeavour to fix solar panels and mend an ammonia leak. It's the fourth time these two have walked out together. This latest stroll took 6.5 hours, but they circled the Earth every 93 minutes and were travelling at 27,000 kilometres an hour. And it's worth keeping on top of those repairs. The space station has been described as the most expensive single item ever made.
And the headlines again. China sets its growth target for 2021 more than 6% at the world's biggest political gathering in Beijing.
The EU backs Italy's move to block shipping AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine to Australia.
And supermarket sweep. Amazon's new high street shop means you'll no longer have to queue at the till to pay.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Yes, thank you. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. But from all of us in London, have a great weekend. Bye-bye.